Independent. You know it. You love it. You can't live without it. Rockland World Radio.
Welcome to Dialogues with Dan, heard on Rockland World Radio every Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sure to check out the archives located off the menu bar. So, without any further ado, here's the host of Dialogues with Dan, Mr. Dan Windheim.
Hi everyone, this is Dan. I hope everyone had a great holiday. And tonight, I'll have a special guest. I'm speaking with Mona Cosentino about American Sign Language, the hearing impaired, and the deaf. I'd like to introduce Mona Cosentino. Oh, hi, Mona.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, great, thanks. Glad you could join us.
Glad to be here.
Maybe we could start the interview by Mona telling us about your background and how you became involved with deaf services, hearing impaired.
Okay, well, actually, I'm a sign language interpreter, and I came into this field because I was born to deaf parents. I'm what's known as a CODA, a child of deaf adults. And I grew up with the language. I'm a native to the language, and I had seen that there was a need for it, and there's a real need for native signers. And so I got into it when I was in my early 20s. I was working at the School for the Deaf in White Plains.
Yes.
And often was asked to interpret various meetings. So I decided to go ahead and run with it.
Wow. Yeah, I'm wondering, what was it like growing up with deaf parents? I realize it's the only thing you know, but you had friends that had hearing parents.
Yes.
And did you notice you were missing out on things, and how so, and did you feel a change or a strain?
You know, deaf people have their own community. So I grew up with a lot of people who had deaf parents, people like myself that could hear, and also people that were deaf who had deaf parents. And while I was the only person with deaf parents in school, I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. Sometimes I felt like it was harder for my parents to get to know the parents of my friends.
Yes.
And a lot of times the teachers in school or the various administrators didn't know what to do on parent-teacher night when they met my parents.
Yes.
And oftentimes everybody just sort of deferred to me, which was kind of a strange position to be put in, but it was a typical one for people who, like myself, could hear and had deaf parents. There's wonderful, wonderful things about having deaf parents too, though.
Oh, I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine back then, well, not that long ago, that that there weren't really much out there about what to do with deaf parents, and
it really was the Americans with Disabilities Act, that came about in 1990 that really, made interpreters much more mainstream thing and part of, everyday life. But as a kid, yeah, I mean, we would get stared at a lot in restaurants. Nowadays, it's more like people come up to us and say, oh, hey, I took sign language and I know how to do this sign and that sign. They start signing to us. I never was embarrassed by my parents or anything. Some kids were, but for the most part, I wasn't. Or I never was, I should say. And yeah, there's a lot of changes now.
I imagine, in a way, you were ahead of other people.
How so?
Because it made you more aware of differences and aware of challenges.
Yes.
And
yes.
that was probably a big plus.
Yes. I consider that a blessing, and like I said, there's some wonderful things that came with having parents that were deaf. And yes, it definitely, I think, made me more compassionate. I think it makes those of us who had deaf parents more compassionate and
Excellent.
sensitive to people with different needs.
Yeah, could you tell us how services have changed, like over the years?
I can really only speak about sign language interpreting.
Yes.
Again, like I said, with the Americans with Disabilities Act amendment that was made in 1990 requiring, various public businesses to provide interpreters. What's been great is that there's been more access for deaf people to different types of education and higher education and all kinds of places. A woman who maybe wanted to take, some art classes at a local art school now can do that and maybe couldn't in the past. I shouldn't just say a woman, I'm thinking, I guess, about people who, have hobbies, and I guess I'm thinking of women. I don't know why. But just more access. As far as services go, I really don't know enough about that. Deaf schools have always been the hubs for providing services and referring to other services, but for the most part, interpreting has been the thing that's really changed a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I imagine, like years ago, a deaf person would only go to, say, Gallaudet University in Maryland, and there weren't that many schools for the deaf. And I imagine these days most schools are able to deal with that deaf population.
Yeah, the schools for the deaf have grown since the first one was established, but there's also, because of inclusion and mainstreaming, there's like deaf schools that are actually closing because of that. But yes, from the beginning of the history of deaf schools in America, there certainly were more that spread about in the country. But as far as access to education in schools that are not specific to the deaf, yes, interpreting and the laws that apply to that have made that possible. It's wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, so, Mona, you said you work for yourself, but you also, do you get hired from different, like, businesses or agencies? Do you work primarily with, say, Joanio or other agencies?
Right now, I'm strictly freelance, but there have been times throughout my interpreting career where I have been employed as a staff interpreter at various places.
Right. Yes, so maybe you'd like to give your email. Do you have a website or a number in case people want to contact you?
Actually, the best way to find me is through the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf website.
Yes.
I am a certified interpreter, and along with that, I get to be listed as an available interpreter in this area on their website, and that's rid. I think it's .org or .com. I can quickly look that up.
Yes.
But it's the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf website.
Oh, that's good. Do you know offhand they have a huge database of interpreters?
Yes, they do. It's national.
Oh, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, Mona, could you speak about ASL or American Sign Language? Has it changed over the years?
Yes, it has been an evolving language, like any language. I'm not an expert at this topic. Oddly enough, I can speak it well, but I didn't study it. But it was started by actually a combination of a Frenchman who, because in France, they were one of the first countries to have a free public school for the deaf, and they embraced manual language as a means to communicate and educate deaf kids, whereas most of the time up until then, I guess they had been, focusing more on trying to get deaf kids to speak and read lips.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a famous Frenchman that is very well regarded in the deaf community. His name was Laurent Claire, and he and an American man, he was a reverend, Thomas Gallaudet, which is what the university that you mentioned, the Deaf
Yes.
University, is named after him. They got together and they opened up the American School for the Deaf. Well, I think it was called the American Asylum for the Deaf and Dumb in Hartford, Connecticut. And they kind of incorporated French Sign Language along with some natural sort of organic sign language that had developed with a small within the deaf community here locally, and they kind of combined the two. So American Sign Language has its roots in French Sign Language. So,
Right.
And it's evolved over the years, definitely. Also, you should know that American Sign Language is strictly American Sign Language, and that sign language is not universal. A lot of people think that, but in
Yes.
other countries, other than France, I guess, it would look very different.
Yeah, so that must make, well, I guess just like hearing people who go to another country, they don't understand it.
That's right.
And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, understandably, people assume it's universal because it's
Yes.
gestural,
right.
and there are some things that are kind of universal, but not the entire language.
Oh, makes sense.
Mhm.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Amorna, maybe I'd ask you to go through the alphabet for the camera
Okay.
and, just let people have an understanding of the alphabet.
Okay. Yes, the good old alphabet. Okay. So.
Let me ask you
Yeah.
before you do it. In deaf sign language, do they do A, B, C, D with the sign language?
Like sing the song
Yeah.
in sign language?
Yes.
Not that I know of, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do that sometimes in elementary schools. It really depends, but probably, I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah. There are times when some type of song or signing to music is incorporated,
Right.
especially nowadays with more and more children being implanted with a cochlear implant.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's
Not at all.
go
Okay.
through the alphabet.
Okay, so just look here. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. I forgot my
Yeah.
alphabet for a second. So I wasn't doing it in the sing-songy way that I grew up doing it in. Wow.
Yeah, do it that way.
No.
No?
No.
Is it A, B, C, D, E, F, G?
Yeah,
But sign language. Is that...
no.
No, it isn't. All right, never mind. Yes, so you definitely said different countries have different signs for their letters.
Mm-hmm.
How about numbers?
I don't know. I would assume those are different as well.
But as far as ASL,
Mm-hmm.
1,
Mm-hmm. You want me to do that for you?
Yeah,
Sure.
would you?
What would you like me to go up to?
I don't know.
10?
Yeah, that
Okay,
sounds
so it's
good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And I know I learned a little
Yeah.
that 10 is like that, 20's like that.
This is 10. You kind of shake your thumb up like this,
Yes.
like you're hitchhiking. And this is 20.
Yes.
Yep.
And 30.
30. So it's really sort of like an abbreviated form of 20
Yes.
and 30 and
Right.
40 and 50
Oh,
and 60
yes.
and thus far. Yeah.
And as far as names,
Mm-hmm.
I know people have specific sign names.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Not always, but yes.
Yes. And they're related to the first letter of their name. Like Mona might be M.
Right?
What
Yes.
is
N-
your
yes.
sign name?
Yes. I don't have one actually. Years and years ago, I used to work as a staff interpreter, and they gave me one where they took the letter M and they kind of indicated like wavy hair. But that was sort of just only specific to that place that I worked. But not everyone has a sign name. Usually, if a name is short enough, they'll just spell it.
Yes.
It's not always initialized. The sign itself doesn't always have a letter. A lot of times the sign is indicating a noticeable physical trait on the deaf person, and that's sort of
Yes.
part of deaf culture, is because it's a culture that's based on visual cues and on looking at things.
Like cute?
Yeah, or dimple. That could be the
What's cute?
in sign language.
Yeah, I forgot that.
Cute.
Oh. Dimple.
Yeah, well, they don't do this for cute, but you
No,
know,
yeah.
if somebody had a dimple and
Yeah.
their friends all said that person with the dimple is the
Yeah.
person that we're talking about, then that's how they
Oh.
would be indicated. In fact, years ago, a lot of times deaf kids wouldn't necessarily know the name of their friend. They wouldn't know to write it or spell it. They just knew it by the sign.
Right.
Hmm.
Wow, it's quite an interesting world.
Oh, there's so much.
Yes. At this time, maybe you could speak about, well, saying, my name is.
Hmm.
Is that just my name is?
Well, they don't use articles a lot in sign language, so they wouldn't necessarily say is, although there is a sign for is.
Yes.
They would just say my name. So you
Huh.
indicate my by open hand to the
Yes.
chest. So my name, and then you would just spell your name.
Yes.
And if you have a sign name, you might spell it and then do the sign name.
Right.
Hmm.
And hello and goodbye.
Those are the universal ones.
What?
It's just hello and goodbye.
Oh, yeah. And I am from.
So you would point to yourself and you'd say I from. This is kind of like a lot of sign language is based in the context.
Yes.
So if you're pointing to yourself and then saying the word from, it's
Mhm.
understood that you're saying I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And where do you live?
You would say this is the sign for where,
Yes.
and you don't say do you. You would just say where and then live, because the do you is implied in the direction that you're signing in and who you're looking at, and the question is indicated on the face. So if I was talking to somebody here in front of me and I said,
Yeah.
that right
Yes.
there, it gives you the whole entire sentence.
So it's a lot of sign language is implied, or is
Yeah, you could say
it's
that.
common, you have to draw conclusions.
Yes, I guess you could say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nothing's wrong with it.
Mm-mm.
It's a,
Like I said, I'm really not the expert
Yes.
on it.
but you're our expert.
Yeah, I guess
today.
so.
Yes. Morna, our expert.
Yes.
Yes, so can I help you?
I'd need more background. Am I? The basic sign would be. So it's like me help you, or it could just be help and then indicate to the person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And please.
Please.
And you said thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you.
Mother.
Mother.
And that comes from mother.
My understanding of where that sign comes from is, what you'll notice is all the feminine signs tend to be here on the cheek, and the masculine are up here at the head.
Yes.
And that supposedly comes from, the old-fashioned notion that the man was the head of the family. Right. And that I know girl is an indication of bonnet strings.
Yes.
And boy is here for the cap.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we had mother, father.
Father's here.
Father's here. Sister.
Sister.
Brother.
Brothers, same, but from the head.
And are there any other important ones that you think would be good to point out?
A well-known one is the I love you hand. A lot of people use that.
Yes.
It's the way you sign I love you is to point to yourself, I love you. But this is an abbreviation, and it's an amalgam of the letters I, L, and Y. So it's I, L, and Y.
I never knew that.
Yeah. And deaf people do this all the time as a quick sort of like, love ya,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's dangerous, because I know things. Where's the bathroom?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What is the bath?
This is, it's really the letter T, and you just kind of shake it back and forth.
Toilet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people mistake giving the, the rock and roll evil eye sign for I love you, but you have to make sure the thumb is sticking out, otherwise you're giving somebody like the evil eye. The malocchio is what we say in Italian.
Yes. Yes, Miss Costantino.
Yes.
Yeah, Mona.
Mm-hmm.
With computers, videos, and technology, do you think ASL is becoming obsolete or might become obsolete?
No. Actually, if anything is affecting ASL, and this actually has been discussed in conferences, it's more that because the numbers of students attending deaf schools is diminishing because they're all going to schools within their districts or they're being mainstreamed, they tend to be the only deaf kid in their school, and the exposure that they're getting to sign language is usually through an interpreter. And not always an interpreter that's native to the language. Not that that necessarily means anything, because there are interpreters that are not native to the language that are brilliant interpreters. But the kids are often being exposed to sign language at an early age by people who aren't deaf and who are not native to the language. And so the language is becoming sort of diluted and corrupted. And deaf people are very concerned about the loss of the language. Oftentimes when kids get out of school and go into secondary schooling, they'll choose programs that are strong on, deaf ed and have a large deaf population, like the Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., or NTID, which is located up on the Rochester Institute of Technology campus. Right. And that's where they're sort of really strengthen the language, and there really is an effort to preserve the language. Videos and technology and all that stuff. The only thing that's been said that's really been affecting is before we had all that, deaf people would have to actually physically get together and be in each other's presence to visit with each other. And now what's happening is they're having that opportunity less and less because they can communicate via video or through some digital means.
Like Skype.
But that's happening, for people who aren't deaf either, huh? Like we're not getting together as much as we would in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So socializing is being affected, or what's the word I'm looking for? Communing, getting together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that's very sad, or do you think it's just something along the progression of life?
I guess I think it's both. As a kid, I grew up going to what we would call deaf clubs, and it was wonderful, and I miss them, and I know a lot of people from that culture do miss them, so I guess I do feel a little sad, but it's not all gone and lost. There are deaf people who still, get together, but maybe they're getting together at a bar, and they're getting together with the friends that they went to college with,
Right.
I still think it would be nice to have deaf clubs, and there are still some that are alive and well.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mona, with cochlear implants and the use of that, maybe we could start by first explaining what cochlear implants are, and then I'm wondering, do you think cochlear implants are going to put an end to sign language? And I'm wondering about the use of cochlear implants. Well, first, explain what a cochlear implant is, if you would.
Okay, well, it's a device that is actually implanted, behind the bone. There's, I don't know what you call it. I'm really not an expert on this, but there's like an electrode that gets woven through the cochlea, and it stimulates the auditory nerve, and it's sort of a permanent device.
Yes.
And then there's a receiver that is sort of attached via a magnet to the outside of the head, and it picks up noise and sound. It's whereas a hearing aid is something that amplifies whatever hearing you already have, a cochlear implant is actually directly stimulating the auditory nerve. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it's becoming a more successful device with advancements in the technology, and there are people who love it and there are people who hate it. Some deaf people see cochlear implants and any type of, cure for deafness as, sort of like the annihilation of their race, because you have to understand that, deaf people have their own culture, they have their own language, they have their own universities, they marry each other, and there are some deaf people who want their children to be deaf because they feel like they want to be as connected to their children as anybody else does, and they want to feel like their children have an understanding of them as parents, and who they are as people. And then there are deaf people who want their children to hear because they think it's easier for them to hear. It's such a controversial topic, and there's no easy answers. I don't know if I think it will, annihilate the deaf race and annihilate American Sign Language or sign language. I think it's way too soon to determine that.
Oh, yes. How long would you say cochlear implants, they've been around?
I do not know. I don't know the answer to that.
No idea?
No, I don't. I'm so sorry.
But they're getting better at perfecting them.
Yes. Yes, I've heard
Yes.
that the most recent technology has made it such that a person who gets implanted can better listen to, enjoy, and hear music, whereas I guess that wasn't the case in the early days.
Yes. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Phenomenon.
Yeah, and there are young children. I know that they say that the earlier you implant, a child, the better they have with it, the better success they have with it, because I guess the brain makes connections.
Yes.
I don't know enough about it. I'm so sorry.
No.
I know more about the cultural implications, I would
Yes.
say. And there are people that, feel that deafness isn't a disability or an illness and that it doesn't need to be
Yes.
cured, which is more the social model, whereas the medical model is, of course, that it's something that needs to be fixed.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, so I imagine that there's a big discourse between the deaf and the hard of hearing, and those who lip read, those who have cochlear implants. There's so many variations.
Yes. Yes.
And there must be discourse between all those groups.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, culturally they identify differently as well. But sometimes there's mixing. It depends on how one grows up. If someone grows up in the deaf community, but they're hard of hearing, they may feel like they're more comfortable in the deaf community. Some hard of hearing people relate more to the hearing community. Oh, that's another thing, is that when you come from the deaf world, you see people who are not deaf as hearing. So if you hear me say that, you know why. There are people, yes, there's a variation on how they want to be identified and what language they use to communicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you feel, people are people.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, they might have a cochlear implant, they might read lips,
Mm-hmm.
they might use sign language. And they're all just people making their way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's important for me to say here that deaf people have often felt like any oppressed group, that decisions were made for them by the people who weren't deaf, and that a lot of deaf people suffered at the hands of those decisions and those people. Also, deaf people have their own culture, so somebody who becomes deaf later in life and learns sign language might not feel like they really fit in with the deaf world. So
Right.
that there are issues around levels of hearing loss and where you fit in, and somebody might get a cochlear implant but not be able to hear very well, or maybe know some sign language and not be able to speak very well, so they kind of are not doing very well in the hearing world or the deaf world. So there's pros and cons to all of it. But yes, I absolutely think people are people, and they need to, choose what's best for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. As long as they're doing the choosing, I'm happy to hear that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Mona Casentino,
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
On Dialogues with Dan. Did you have a nice Thanksgiving?
I did.
Oh,
And you?
excellent. Very good, thanks.
Wonderful.
This has been Mona Casentino on Dialogues with Dan. Have a great week, everyone. Peace.
Welcome to the new sound of Rockland. RocklandWorldRadio.com. Exciting online TV and radio.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
Welcome to the new sound of Rockland. RocklandWorldRadio.com. Exciting online TV and radio. Watch and listen to what you've been missing. Broadcasting independent music, art, and culture. From the world of pop to poetry, classical to cutting edge. Movies, comedy, jazz, jams, rock and roll baby, interviews, information, and event listings. Join the revolution. It's not just radio, it's Rockland World Radio. RocklandWorldRadio.com.